nice to be back with you this afternoon. It seems like I've been away for longer than a week, but it has only been a week. And I came back to some goodies that I'm still getting through and playing with. I've had my new interference inks delivered, so I haven't really had a play with them, to be honest, just yet. I will use a couple of them today. But what I really wanted to do was just use a couple of the embossing folders, and I wanted to use them together. And you can see I've had a little play, and this next one that I'll do live for you will just be sort of an amalgamation of what I've done already, because so this is what I've prepped just to see how the card will go. I've wanted to use the A6 designs, actually, the Floral Vine, which I haven't used before, but they are on the website. Yes, I want to use the Floral Vine, but I also wanted to use the mechanical rivets, because this is really a lovely folder. It's really sort of my sort of thing, definitely something I'm drawn to, but I wanted to use it in a floral way, because although this is absolutely brilliant for the guys cards, obviously everything that Lisa does can be used for both. So I just wanted to show you like a really pretty way to use this today. But in doing so, what I've done, I've actually sort of double embossed this piece. If I turn it over, you can see what I've done. I've basically used the design of the embossing folder in the background, and by embossing the floral on top of it, it pushes that design into the background, so it's less evident, but it's still there. So you still get the best of both worlds. You get the best of both designs. You'll also see what I've done from both of these tests so far is that I've actually inked the mechanical background embossing folder to create an impression in the background. Now this is the one that I've done first off, and I actually inked the embossing folder and used it as a stamp basically, which I really like this design. But I think what I might do next time, I will only ink around the outside, so we don't have the floral elements stamped over. But I think that does work. If you choose your colours right, I think that does work. So that is one way to use that. This one I've actually inked, so the we have inking in the background, so we've actually shaded the squares. This, I think, having done it, I think I would perhaps choose different colours, because you see this one pops a little bit more. So this one I possibly would use less ink in the background, but I think this does actually highlight the background embossing folder also, and this would work, I think, really well if I did emboss the same as I've done this. So what I'm intending to do next time round, and that I'll show for you, what I want to do is do some light inking in the background, so we are actually shading those squares and perhaps highlighting some of these rivets. And I will stamp some of these lines around into the design, but I'll only do it around the outside, so we have less pronounced lines sort of going into the floral pattern. And I will do this live. I will do the embossing sort of live for you as well, just so you can see how it all comes together. So let's get going. As I say, this is sort of a bit of a work in progress, and this is how a lot of the sort of cards and designs sort of come about. We do a couple of sort of test outs, and just to see how products work together. And this is possibly what you do at home. So when we say to you, just go away and play with what you have, this is the sort of thing that you would come out of it. And then this is how you can see how the products work, and then this is how you develop your colours and see which ones work well with each other. And actually, just looking at this one now, as that ink is dried, I've actually used some of the new interference ink on that, and I can actually see that mica come into the fore. So this is actually the first time that I've played with them and actually seen how fabulous that is. So that really does bring it to life. It's got a lovely sheen on there, isn't it? Okay, so let's get going. So I'm going to start off with the background embossing folder, and I've already cut my piece to size here. Now the trick in doing this is actually adding the ink to the right part of the embossing folder. So the way that I always think about it is that you want to push the design out of the page, so the side of the embossing folder that is raised, sort of coming towards you, is what should be on the bottom. So therefore we need to ink the top. It took me a long while actually using embossing folders to actually sort of get to grips with that, and no end of times I wasted card having the design on the wrong side, but I've figured it out. So to start with, now let me just see the colours I've used here. I've used pink to stamp there, and I've done a little bit of grey inking. So I think what I'll do, I want somewhere in between the two, I think. Do I use a yellow maybe? Let's have a see. No, maybe I'll go with the pink because I have it here. And I think what I'll do, yes, I'll take the ink with a blending brush. Just take a small amount. Do I want to take it with a blending brush? Yeah, because I think I only want to add a very small amount. And I'll just add the ink to the embossing folder. And actually, let me get a piece of card underneath there. So I can see what I'm doing. There we are. So you can actually see the pink going onto the page there, and I think already that is actually too much. So what I'll try and do is actually spread that out, because the act of actually embossing this makes this ink really stand out a lot more than you'd imagine. Because when I done this one here, I only thought I put a little bit of grey on, but I actually put far too much on, because I feel that that's gone quite dark in the background for this particular floral. I think if I used a different design that would work, but you can see the effect. So I think what I really will do is just be really gentle, and I'll possibly just come in with a smaller stencil brush, because that will just let me pick out the details even more. And what I want to do really is just blend that pink ink where the rivets are. So I'm just going to dab it on initially, because remember, I don't necessarily want to come into the centre this time round. So, and a small bit of ink goes such a long way, and I don't know if you can actually, oh, there's a few shadows going on, but you possibly can just about see that. But such a small amount of ink that I really want to blend that into each of the corners, like where the rivets are, just to highlight them. And we'll just do this really gently. And I think you really is the case of less really is more on this. You've got such a light hand. You can possibly get away with a bit more ink around the outside, because this is where we would possibly add our shading anyway if we were using a blending brush direct onto the paper. But I'm going to do that ever so gently and just make sure that that's really blended, just where the rivets are. Not so much in the centre. I am going to leave that. But this, I'm hoping, will give us a really soft blend. I should perhaps just add a little bit more onto the corners here, because that will just highlight the design. And as I say, that's where I would possibly go in with a little bit more detail and a little bit heavier ink if I were going direct to paper. And I think also what I might do, just come in with a tiny bit of grey just on the outside corners. I'll just dab that off my hand. It really is just a tiny amount. Oh, I'm hoping that will just give us a little bit of detail. Now, I don't know if you've seen us do demos like this before. You don't need to work as quick as you'd imagine. You don't need to get this into your die cutting machine to emboss it as quick as you'd imagine, worrying about the ink to dry, because I say the act of actually embossing this and actually squeezing that embossing folder onto the paper means that the ink will be transferred anyway. So let's bring my card in. Actually, I do want to stamp as well, so we want to have some of the lines of the background sort of coming through. So what I'll do, I take my ink pad and I'll just tap gently around the outside. The lines actually creating these blocks in the background are ever so fine, so it really doesn't take a huge amount of ink anyway. But I'm just doing that around the outside, so that detail will be picked up also. Now it's up to you whether you want to tidy up around the edge there, because we have some excess ink, but that will still work just as nicely. We won't use that piece of card. We'll take our piece of card that I've already pre-cut and just make sure that that's squared up, because obviously you don't want to be opening and closing the folder too much, because you will be transferring all the ink. So we close that down, and actually like that you can see that how much ink we've got on there. So I'm just going to run this through the embossing folder now. It's possibly just off screen. So I'll just put that through backwards and forwards. Hopefully that didn't shake the camera too much for you. So yes, that is really subtle actually, and that is what I want, because basically I want the flower to sort of come to the fore. So I did really just want like a subtle background. I could possibly have put a bit more ink on, but we can also add a little bit more ink with our blending tools afterwards if we needed to. So now we've done that, this is when we can get onto the stencil work. I'm using one of these smaller A6 stencils, which are just so cute, and they come together so quickly. And I'm going to stencil directly over this embossed image already. So we need to just line that up. If you wanted, you can have it so some of it comes off the page, or you can have it central. That's entirely up to you. Of course, I will go central with this one. So if we have that there, now what I'll do, just make sure that I square up that design on the page. Okay, that works for me like that. Now, where's my green blending brush? There it is there. So you can see I've already got the ink on the page from when I was actually playing a little bit earlier on. I thought initially that I might actually want to go quite pale with these colours, but looking at this second one that I tried here, I've actually gone a lot darker, and I think that works really well. So I shall probably go with plenty of ink on this, just so as it stands out. And because we have the embossing already on the card that we're stenciling onto, there's going to be an element of shading happen anyway, isn't there, because of the nature of the card that we're going onto. So there are already the contoured areas of the card, so we're going to have an element of shading going onto the page, which I think is a really nice feature as well. So we put our green on. Now there's a couple of stencils that make up the foliage for this particular design, so therefore we want to work with a couple of different greens. Now I do have the interference green, but I didn't want to go in with that just yet. I want to get used to the colours. So just to alter the shades of green that I'm using and just create a bit of a contrast, I will be using some blue ink. Let's go this one here, and you can see that it's on this layer here that I'm taking the green that was already on the stencil. I'm just introducing a bit of blue, and that gives me a really nice shade of blue. Now, of course, there is the new shades, or there are the new shades of inks winging their way to everybody as well. So that will also give us a different shade of green to be using, which I'm really excited to receive those as well, because being a lot paler, they will give us a lot more, you know, a lot more options. But I mean, who doesn't like a new ink pad and new colours? I'm like a kid in a sweet shop with inks, I must admit. I get so excited with the new colours and new possibilities. So I've just added a little bit of blue on there, so now I can come back in and just pick up the rest of the green that's on the stencil, just add a little more, and that will start blending and giving us our different shades for this foliage that's on this level. So there we are. Actually, this time round it's given us a lot more of a grassy green as opposed to a bluey green, but that's good. Yeah, you see we've got the different shades going on there. Now we come in with the leafy detail, and because we're using a stencil brush, this green which I've used initially is immediately going to go down a lot darker, because I don't know if you've noticed, but blending the inks, depending on the size of the brush that you're using and the style of the brush that you're using, you can create completely different shades. And because this is going on top of a green already, we want this to sort of stand out. Now you could do that with the grey, you could do it with a purple or a blue, but I found that by using a smaller brush we can get a much more concentrated amount of colour as well. But it's nice to have the options, isn't it? And you find all this out just by playing, and you have your own way of doing things, the things that you're happy, and the things that work for your brain and for your hand. So we can go there. So, oh, I've moved that slightly. Right, because I've moved that slightly, I'm just going to make sure that that's now lined up. So it's easy done. So we come back onto our first stencil actually, and we just make sure that those leaves are lined up. We can put that back on the peg system, make sure those leaves are lined up, and we know that we are back on track. So I can put the first stencil back in place and then just move on to the next one that we needed to anyway. Okay, so here we are, we have our stalks. So I'm going to come in with a, let me see, I should probably come in with a brush actually then. I think what I might do is just highlight those with a bit of grey, just to make them look a little bit different. As I say, I think there is a green interference ink there, isn't there? I've not used it yet, so what I don't want to do at this stage is come in with a colour that I'm not familiar with and have it look completely wrong. That's for something for me to do when nobody's looking, I think. But I will have a play, because I can't believe the sheen that Lisa's managed to achieve on those inks actually. It's going to add an awful lot of dimension to a lot of our stencils, being able to add that colouring in, and also using them on different colours. So I've got a lot to catch up on, it seems. So I'm just going to come in with a bit of grey, just so as I can just add a little bit of a difference to these green stems, because as I say, I've used the same green all the way through. We don't need to use too much grey, but just a little bit will just give us enough of a difference. So we can see that building up nicely. Now we can come on to our flowers. And this is where I will use the interference inks. And I remember Lisa saying, actually, and it's possible that you'll more expert at this than I am at the moment, but we need to swap to our blending sponges. Now, before these stencil brushes and blending brushes came into play, I always used my own handmade holders. I'm using Lisa's brushes, the blending foam tops, and I just add them onto a bit of Velcro that I've stuck onto these blocks. What that has enabled me to do is it means I can have a block for every colour there, so I'm not swapping and changing the pads, which I'd end up getting in a right old mess. So okay, we have the two interference colours. These are the ones I'm going to use. I'm going to use the Sweet Treat shimmer, which is the yellow, because if I remember right, Lisa was saying that the colour on the left hand side is what appears on white card, and what appears on the black card is on the right side. So we have the yellow from the Sweet Treat, and I'm using the pink or the corally colour from the Fruit Salad shimmer. So let's see how we go. So I'm going to pick up a tiny bit of ink, and I'm actually using a blending, a piece of blending plastic just off to the side here, just to take off the majority of that ink, so I'm not going in too strong initially. It just enables me just to control the ink that I'm putting down. So I can come in and blend. Now, as I say, because we're actually blending onto an already embossed piece of cardstock, it actually gives us quite an interesting pattern in the background. But I think that works. So I'll go with slightly paler on that one. Now, obviously, I'm conscious that there is another layer to go into this, so I don't want to go too heavy at this stage with the yellow. And I'm probably a little bit conservative with the amount of ink that I lay down initially, for one's sake, because it's the first time I'm using the inks, but I do like the initial layer to be a lot paler, and we can build that up with our layers. So it's always easier to build up the ink, isn't it? Because if you put too much down initially, there's not a huge amount you can do about it. So we have that on there, and you can see that the floral design is still coming to the forefront, even though we have the embossed design in the background. So I'm going to swap to the pink, and I'm going to pick up a bit of colour, and I can work this into the design here. Now this is so pretty. It'll be interesting actually to see how these inks do work with the smaller stencil brushes, because it's got the potential to create different shades on different flowers here, which could really make this stand out. So we're going quite pale initially. Now this is where the layering comes in, and I'm going to layer with pink over the yellow, so hopefully we'll get a really nice orangey peachy effect over these flowers here. So I'm only using the ink that I had on the sponge already, and just picking up just a little bit more, so I don't want to overpower it. I'll pick up a tiny bit more perhaps and just dab that off, then come back into the flowers here. And these blending sponges, if you're not particularly familiar with using these, I used to use these all the time, but you can still get a really nice blend on them. And because we're using them through stencils, you can get a really nice diffused look. Because we've got so much plastic on our stencil, what I would suggest you do, if you're a little bit unfamiliar with using them, is work the ink into the stencil first, not flat down so it's sort of sitting like that, but at a slight angle, because there's enough give on that foam to be able to use at a slight angle. So basically you're pushing the ink in, and what that does, it means that you'll get a really nice shaded amount of ink or a shaded amount of colour into or through your stencil, you can see here that we have more of the pink laying through the stencil than on this side. That's because I was actually using the sponge at a slight angle and pushing the ink in, and that's what gives you that shading as well. So I might just come in with a little bit more pink actually on these smaller flowers here, just to make them stand out. Like so, and a little bit on there. Actually, if I just do that, you'll be able to see that you can still get that blend even with the blending sponges as opposed to using a brush. So if I take that away now, you can see that we do have shading on these smaller flowers. Although they're small and delicate and I'm using a larger sponge, it really you can still get that airbrushed effect. Now the last stencil we're coming and use is just a tiny little detail but essential. Let's pick up a good amount of ink of the yellow and just put the centre of those flowers in there like that. I mean, it's amazing that Lisa actually goes to the effort of giving us a stencil with just 3 tiny little holes on, isn't it? I mean, you'd hardly think that that'd be worth it, but that can make so much difference in the finishing details, which gives our project such a professional look. So I mean, having used the stencils now since they first came out, I'm still blown away with how much detail that we can actually get from these. Okay, so we have that stenciled there, and this again, I've probably gone quite pale on there, probably a lot paler than I did on there. So therefore we haven't got as much of a sheen, but I still think it's pretty. But what we can do now, just to highlight those flowers, we don't need to use the dye of this actually. So the Floral Vine, like most of the stencils actually coming out now, we have the stencils and the embossing folder. And the embossing folder, particularly when we have something this detailed, does come with a dye, but I don't need to use that, because all I want to do is just to double emboss, I suppose. What I'll do now, I'll emboss those flowers. Yeah, I'll emboss the flowers, but it does mean that it will flatten the background, the mechanical background into the background. But I don't think that matters, because the 3D nature of these embossing folders and the detail that Lisa manages to get into them, that even by flattening out the background, you will still keep that detail. Now, obviously, there is another way around of doing this. If you wanted to keep the dimension both into the background and the foreground, there's nothing stopping you in actually die cutting out these flowers and then embossing them and putting them on top of the embossing folder detail itself. That is another way of doing it. But I'm just lining this up while I'm chatting to you and making sure that I get this right. But I just wanted to see how it worked by double embossing, and I think it's a really nice technique that you can use. Particularly sometimes we get low on card, don't we? And we've realised that we need to put an order in and get some more white card, or if we can't find it, or for whatever reason, sometimes it's nice just to do a single layer card. So what I've done there, I've actually embossed that, and you can see that it has flattened the background, but it's still visible. So basically you do still have that background in there, but it's actually brought the flowers to the forefront. And if I just turn that over, you can still see that we have the mechanical background, and I have actually embossed the flowers as well. So I think that is a really nice design. What I can do now, I think, I'll just bring in another blending mat. I can just add a little bit more detail that I didn't manage to get in the background there. And I think what I might do, I might actually use the interference ink here. So I'll just go with what I have on the sponge already and just add a little bit of pink around the outside. I'll just pick up a little bit more. And that just gives us our frame around the flower. Now what I will do, I think I'll have a play with actually stamping onto that rivet background as well, and actually perhaps putting some text in the background. We can possibly do that now because of this, we've actually flattened the background when we emboss the flowers. It does mean we can possibly stamp on the background as well now. Now this is what happens when I start playing. I do one thing and then I get carried away and I get ideas and I think, oh, I must do this and I must do that. And so because I haven't been home all that long, I haven't had a chance to have a proper play yet. But over the coming weeks, these things will creep into my life, I think. And we'll get it all covered. So I'm actually going to come in with a bit of yellow just to here and there. And just by adding that over the pink, it just gives a bit of a peachy sort of looking colour. Don't need too much, but it just ties the background in with the flowers. And you don't need to go all the way round. And what you can do, you can actually come in further onto the card as well, like that. And say, if you can actually build it up slowly, take off the majority of the ink onto the blending mat there and just sort of come in. That just gives us that little bit of detail in the background, and I think that really works actually. Now what that does need, I think, is a dark frame around the outside. So that will just make those colours pop even more against the white. So I have a card blank, just a simple card blank. Obviously this can be jazzed up an awful lot more. But if we just have that and we have that dark frame and we put that against the mirror card in the background there, I think that the colours work so well. So we have that lined up, and just a simple sentiment on there. You really don't need much more. And this is onto a 5x7 card blank, so I've used the A6 designs. This can go directly onto an A6 card, but putting that onto a 5x7 card, that just gives you that space and gives you the opportunity to sort of mat and layer around the outside. And I really don't think you need much more than that. Say the technique is there to actually double emboss, and I'm sure there are other folders that we can use that will enable us to do that. I think this background here, the mechanical rivets background, has got so many possibilities to use. I know Dawn's done a lot of lives making mail cards with it. It's my first time using it, so there's going to be an awful lot more, I'm pretty sure, that I can do with that. Okay, so if I bring those back in there, you can sort of see my thought process with how I actually got to today's card, which again I think is quite important to see, because even if you do go through this experimental stage yourself and you think, oh, that's not right, that's, you know, and you do sort of discard that, that's fine. I think that is a process that you do need to go through just to see how things work, because what then that enables you to do is actually come to a piece that you're actually going to make or give away, and you know that you've sort of worked through to that detail. You can see here actually that the lines in the background here have faded more, but yet you can see them more around the outside, which is the look that I wanted to have on this one. So have a play, see what you come up with. You can always keep these to one side while you're playing with a particular folder to remind you how to change things up or what not to do again. But I think this is definitely, experimenting is definitely an important part of the crafting process. So hopefully you enjoyed that today. I do apologise again for not letting you all know that I was going to be here. I promise next week I'll be a lot more organised. I don't know what I'm doing next week, but it'll be something fabulous. Hopefully my other inks will have turned up also. But I may even try and sort of squeeze in the interference inks too. So thanks so much for sticking with me. Oh, we've got a fair few of you now, which is lovely. You are all great in the group. I know you all keep an eye on what goes on in the group, because Lisa on the odd occasion drops that little juicy bit of information that she's either loaded something onto the website, doesn't she, or that there's a cheeky little live coming up or something. So you're all great at keeping up to date with what's going on. So I've really enjoyed coming and getting back to the crafting, and I hope you can all join me again next week. Take care, everyone. Bye now.